My name is Claire Thompson, and I never thought a single moment could split my family wide open. But that was before last Saturday, before I stood in a crowded backyard, surrounded by the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of polite chatter, and watched my 12-year-old son Ethan shrink into himself as my mother-in-law handed two gleaming ribbon-wrapped boxes to his cousins, and nothing to him. It was supposed to be a cheerful summer family barbecue, a combination celebration for three cousins who all had birthdays in June. My husband Mark thought it would be fun, efficient even to combine the parties into one big event. He promised it would be less work for everyone and more memorable for the kids. He couldn't have known that it would turn into the day I'd have to decide whether my son's sense of worth was worth more than keeping the peace. I still remember the way the sun hit those boxes, perfectly square, expensive paper gold bows that caught the light like they belonged in a department store window. I didn't even have to see inside to know they were high-end tech. And judging by the way my mother-in-law Barbara clutched them like sacred relics, she wanted everyone to notice. She called my nieces forward, her voice warm and dripping with affection, and handed them each their gift. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Ethan sat beside me, his hands on his knees, a hopeful smile flickering across his face. I thought no, I prayed she had a third box hidden somewhere. Something for him. But when the applause died down, Barbara simply dusted her hands together and said, "Only the best for my real grandkids." I swear the laughter from across the yard fell into silence. Conversations stalled. Someone's glass clinked too loud on the picnic table, and Ethan, my sweet, funny, gentle Ethan, froze. His smile faded, replaced by confusion, then the kind of hurt you can't mistake even from a distance. He's not Barbara's biological grandson. We adopted him when he was just a baby after years of infertility. We never hid that fact, but in our hearts, it didn't matter. He was ours in every way that counts. Apparently, that wasn't enough for her. I remember every detail, the way his eyes darted to me, silently asking for an explanation I didn't have, the way my own pulse roared in my ears, the instinctive urge to pull him into my arms and shield him from everyone staring. But he bolted before I could move, pushing past chairs, knocking over a plate of cookies, heading straight for the house. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew this wasn't just an awkward family faux pas. This was a line crossed so deep it could never be erased. It was no longer about keeping peace, about making excuses, about telling myself she'll come around. This was about protecting my son from a kind of rejection no child should ever have to feel. If you've ever been in a moment where someone you love is humiliated publicly, you know the heat that rises in your chest, the part of you that wants to fight, and the part of you that just wants to grab them and run. I felt both. Before I tell you exactly what happened after that, how my husband reacted, what Barbara said when confronted, and the decision we made that night, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for someone you love? Think about that as you hear the rest of this story, and if you're watching right now, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your city in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. When I finally found Ethan upstairs in the guest room, he was curled up on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. His knees were pulled tight to his chest, and the sharp summer light pouring through the blinds made his tear tracks glisten. I sat beside him, careful not to crowd him. "Ethan," I said softly, "look at me." His eyes lifted red-rimmed, and my chest tightened. "Why doesn't Grandma like me?" His voice cracked on the word me. I could have lied. I could have told him she was having a bad day or that she didn't mean it that way. But the truth was too obvious, and lying wouldn't protect him from what he'd already felt. "It's not about you," I told him, my voice as steady as I could make it. "It's about her. She's wrong, Ethan. 100% wrong. You're my son. Your dad's son. That's all that matters." He nodded slowly, but I could tell my words weren't enough to erase the sting. I stayed with him until his breathing evened out, then told him he could stay upstairs or come back down with me. He chose to stay. Downstairs, the party was still in motion, though the energy had shifted. People were making awkward small talk. The cousins were showing off their new phones. And Barbara. She was holding court at the picnic table, like nothing had happened. Mark found me at the doorway, his jaw tight. "Where's Ethan?" "Upstairs," I said. "He's not coming back down." Mark didn't need me to explain why. His eyes narrowed as they locked on his mother, and for a second I thought he was going to confront her right there in front of everyone. Instead, he took a deep breath, muttered something about "not here," and we started ushering people toward the dessert table to speed the end of the afternoon. When the last guest left, Barbara stayed seated in the same spot sipping iced tea. "Lovely party," she said, as if she'd been a model grandmother all day. I bit down hard on my tongue. This wasn't the time, not yet. That night, when Ethan was finally asleep, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table. The air between us felt heavy. "I can't believe she said that," Mark said. "I mean, I can believe it, but God, Claire." I cut him off. "This isn't the first time, you know it." He leaned back, his arms crossed. "I know she favors the girls, but this in front of everyone?" "This is who she is," I said. "It's been building for years. Today she just stopped hiding it." Mark rubbed his face with both hands, and I could see the battle in him, the loyalty to his mother versus the instinct to protect his son. Before we could dig further, Barbara waltzed into the kitchen for a glass of water. "What's with all the whispering?" she asked, smiling faintly. Mark stood, but I touched his arm. "Not yet. We're just talking about tomorrow's plans," I said. But inside I was already planning. I wasn't going to let this slide. And I wasn't going to wait until Ethan's next birthday for her to take another swing at him. The truth is, when you live with someone long enough, their little habits, good and bad, become part of the house's rhythm. Barbara's rhythm had been in our walls for 2 years. The clink of her teacup in the morning, the way she left the hall light on all night, the small sighs when she disapproved of something I said or did. But now all I heard in those sounds was the echo of her words. Only the best for my real grandkids. I knew removing her from this house would change the balance completely. I also knew it was the only way Ethan could start to heal. And before I go any further, before I tell you what I found 2 days later, that made me absolutely certain I need to say this. If you've been watching and you've ever had to deal with favoritism in your family, especially when it hurts a child, I want you to share your experience in the comments. How did you handle it? What would you have done in my place? Your stories matter, and you never know who you might help by speaking up. Because this wasn't just about one bad moment. This was the crack that revealed the rot underneath. And it was about to get worse. Over the next week, the air in our house felt different, heavier charged. Ethan avoided the kitchen if Barbara was there, drifting in and out like a shadow. He stopped showing us the little comic strips he'd been drawing, the ones that used to light up his face when we laughed at his clever punchlines. It was like he'd folded himself up, tucking away every part of him that might invite criticism. I'd seen it before in my own childhood. My step-grandmother had a knack for making me feel invisible, and I'd learned early to keep my head down. Now I was watching it happen to my son, and it made me want to put my fist through a wall. Barbara, on the other hand, acted as if the barbecue had been a grand success. She'd brag about how well organized it was to her friends on the phone, completely ignoring the fact that one of her grandchildren had fled the party in tears. It wasn't the first time she'd shown her colors. Looking back, the signs had been there since the day she moved in. The very first weekend after she'd unpacked her things, we'd invited Mark's sister Linda over with her kids. Barbara had baked brownies, rich, chewy, still warm from the oven, but when she handed out plates, she accidentally forgot Ethan's. He'd laughed it off, but I'd caught the flash of embarrassment in his eyes. On holidays, she'd give Linda's boys expensive gifts, fancy sneakers, sports jerseys, while Ethan got whatever was on sale at the local drugstore, a plastic flashlight, a clearance bin puzzle missing a piece. Even at school events, the bias was glaring. Barbara once drove 2 hours to see Linda's oldest play in a championship basketball game, but when Ethan's art was featured in the local library's youth showcase, she claimed she was too tired to go. The library is 8 minutes from our house. I'd brought it up to Mark more than once. "Have you noticed how your mom treats Ethan?" I'd ask, usually late at night when the house was quiet. He'd always sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's from a different generation, Claire. She connects better with the boys because they're into sports like Dad was. She doesn't mean anything by it." And I wanted to believe him. I really did. But those little slights stacked up like bricks, building a wall between my son and the woman who should have been his ally. Now, after the barbecue, that wall had turned into a fortress. Ethan didn't even try to breach it anymore. I decided to keep track of the moments, the offhand comments, the subtle exclusions. Not because I wanted ammunition, but because I needed Mark to see what I saw. Sometimes patterns only reveal themselves when you put them in black and white. It didn't take long. 3 days after the barbecue, Barbara made lasagna for dinner. She served everyone generous portions, then handed Ethan a noticeably smaller slice. "I didn't think you'd want too much," she said with a little smile. "You're a skinny one, aren't you?" Ethan pushed his food around without eating much. Afterward, I wrote it down in my notebook, smaller portion, skinny comment, July 11th. 2 days later, she came home from running errands carrying a bag from a high-end sports store. She unpacked a brand new basketball and cleats for Linda's youngest, just because he made the JV team. Ethan sat at the table doing homework silent. "Don't you have something for Ethan?" I asked, my voice even. Barbara glanced at him, then back to me. "Not today. He's not into sports." That night when Mark came home, I showed him my notes. Page after page of moments so small they could be dismissed on their own. But together they painted the truth in bold strokes. He read in silence, his brow furrowing deeper with each entry. When he finished, he set the notebook down slowly. "I didn't realize it was this bad," he admitted. "I know," I said, "but now you do. And before I go on, before I tell you the discovery that proved beyond doubt that Barbara's favoritism wasn't just thoughtless, but calculated, I want to know from you. Have you ever caught someone in your family showing favoritism like this? How did you handle it? Leave a comment because your story might help someone else see the pattern in their own life. Because in my case, what I found next would strip away the last shred of doubt and set in motion a decision we couldn't take back. 2 mornings later, I was gathering laundry from the downstairs bathroom when something unusual caught my eye. Barbara's cardigan was draped over the hamper, and in its pocket was a crumpled receipt. Normally, I wouldn't touch her things, but the logo printed at the top made me pause. It was from a luxury electronics store downtown, the kind that keeps its doors locked and buzzes you in. I unfolded it and my stomach sank. 2 high-end smartphones, the newest release, over $2,600 total, purchased 12 days before the barbecue. The payment method, a personal debit card, proof she had more than enough funds despite claiming she could barely afford her medications. I just stood there, receipt in hand, the washing machine humming behind me. That single slip of paper confirmed what I'd already suspected: she hadn't simply forgotten Ethan. She'd planned the entire scene, the public gifting, the deliberate exclusion. It wasn't thoughtless, it was calculated. That night, I showed Mark the receipt. His jaw tightened as he read it, then he set it down like it burned. She told me she was barely getting by. That's why I offered for her to stay here rent-free. And while she's been living here, I said, my voice sharper than I intended, she's been using her money to spoil the other kids and humiliate ours. Mark rubbed his face, his voice low. I can't defend that. It was the first time in years I'd heard him say something that didn't excuse her behavior. After dinner, Barbara breezed into the living room and started talking about how Linda's oldest might get a college scholarship for basketball. Ethan was sitting on the couch next to me, sketchbook in hand, trying to stay invisible. When Barbara finally turned to him, it wasn't to ask about his art. "You should really try playing sports," she said. "Might toughen you up. You spend too much time drawing. That's not going to help you fit in." I felt Ethan flinch beside me. That was enough. "Barbara," I said, my voice steady but cold, "can I talk to you in the kitchen?" She followed me in, clearly annoyed at being pulled away from her audience. "What is it now?" I laid the receipt on the counter. "I found this while doing laundry. 2 smartphones, over $2,600. Bought before the barbecue. Care to explain?" Her expression didn't even flicker. "My money is my business. Not when you're living in our home, rent-free, eating our food, using our utilities, and telling us you're broke." She crossed her arms. "I'll spend my money on my actual grandchildren however I see fit." There it was again, actual grandchildren. The words landed like a slap, even though I'd heard them before. Mark came in, then sensing the tension. "Mom, is that true? Did you plan the gifts like that?" Barbara lifted her chin. "Of course, it was a special occasion. They're my blood." And Ethan Mark's voice was tight. "He's yours," she said, as if that explained everything. That night after Ethan went to bed, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table again. Only this time there was no hesitation in his eyes. "She can't stay here," he said. It wasn't going to be easy. This was his mother after all. But we both knew the cost of keeping her was far higher than the discomfort of making her leave. Still, I wasn't ready to rush in blindly. I needed a plan. And before I tell you exactly how we set it into motion and how Barbara reacted when she realized we were serious, I want you to think about this. If someone under your roof treated your child like they didn't belong, would you let it slide to keep the peace, or would you draw the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this next part is where everything came to a head. What we did next would change our household forever. The morning after we decided Barbara couldn't stay, the house felt tense. She sat at the kitchen table in her robe, sipping coffee, flipping through the newspaper, as if she owned the place. Ethan came in backpack slung over one shoulder but paused when he saw her. His usual morning died in his throat. He poured himself a glass of orange juice without making eye contact, then disappeared back toward his room. Mark and I exchanged a look. This couldn't go on. That afternoon, Barbara left for her weekly grocery run. As soon as the front door clicked shut, I told Mark, "When she gets back, I'm going to have the conversation. No more waiting." He nodded. "I'll back you up." While she was gone, I sat in the living room, jotting down what I wanted to say. I wasn't going to let her twist my words or turn this into a shouting match. I'd seen her do it before, deflect, guilt trip, even cry when it suited her. I needed to stay calm and focused. When she came back, arms full of shopping bags, I helped her set them on the counter. "Barbara," I said, "we need to talk." She gave me that little smirk I'd come to know too well. "If this is about the party again, I told you. This isn't just about the party I cut in. It's about the way you've treated Ethan since the day you moved in. The favoritism, the comments, the deliberate exclusion. It stops now, or you can't live here." Her face hardened. "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. He's not my blood. That's just a fact." "It's also cruel," I said evenly, "and it's harming him." Mark walked in, then placing himself between us. "Mom Claire's right. I've been blind to it for too long. You've made Ethan feel like he doesn't belong in his own home." Barbara looked genuinely shocked at first, then offended. "You're choosing her over your own mother." "I'm choosing my son," Mark said. For a moment, the room went silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock. Barbara's eyes darted between us, realizing this wasn't just my fight, it was ours. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You two are making a mistake. Family sticks together." I took a deep breath. Family protects each other. And right now, protecting Ethan means setting boundaries. She didn't respond, just turned and started unloading groceries with a sharp clatter of jars against the countertop. I didn't expect a breakthrough in that moment, but I knew I'd planted the seed. And here's where I want to pause and ask you, if you were in my position, what would you have said? Would you have given her another chance, or told her to pack immediately? Let me know, because this is the part where opinions tend to split. The next days were awkward. Barbara acted as if nothing had happened, chatting about the weather TV shows her friends from church. But every now and then I'd catch her watching Ethan with a look I couldn't read, something between irritation and calculation. That's when I knew we had to move faster. The longer she stayed, the more she could try to turn this around on us. Mark and I agreed by the weekend she'd be gone. And the way we broke the news, that's coming in the next part, along with the moment she showed her true face for the last time under our roof. By Friday, the tension in the house had gone from uncomfortable to unbearable. Ethan moved through rooms like he was on eggshells, careful to avoid Barbara's gaze. Even when she tried to make small talk, his answers were short, one word, maybe two, before he'd disappear upstairs. That morning, Mark and I agreed tonight would be the night. We'd tell her it was time to leave. We'd make it clear this wasn't up for negotiation. The decision felt like a weight on my chest. Not because I doubted it, but because of what it would mean. Mark had never stood against his mother in such a direct way before. And Barbara. She was not the type to go quietly. Around 6, Barbara was in the kitchen making herself tea when Mark walked in, his posture stiff. I joined him, standing just behind. "Mom," he began, "Claire and I have talked. It's time for you to find another place to stay." Her spoon froze mid-stir. "Excuse me." "You've been here for 2 years," Mark said evenly. "We've given you a home, no rent, no bills. But the way you've treated Ethan, it's not something we can overlook anymore." Barbara set the spoon down with a clink. "You're throwing me out over her." She jerked her chin toward me. "This isn't about Claire," Mark said. "It's about Ethan. About the way you've made him feel like he doesn't belong." She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You're both being ridiculous. Children need to learn the truth. He's not my blood, and I don't see why I should pretend." "That truth," I said, stepping forward, "is nothing but an excuse to be cruel." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "You always did think you were better than me. From the moment you married Mark." "Enough," Mark said, his voice firm. "This isn't a debate. We're giving you until Sunday to move your things. Thomas has a guest room. You can stay there until you find a place of your own." Her mouth fell open in mock outrage. "So you've already spoken to Thomas behind my back?" Yes, Mark said simply. He understands. Barbara's cheeks flushed. She slammed her teacup down so hard, a few drops splashed onto the counter. You'll regret this, she hissed. I didn't flinch. The only thing I regret is not protecting Ethan sooner. She stormed out of the kitchen, muttering about betrayal. Upstairs, a door slammed. Mark and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the muffled thud of drawers opening and closing above us. She's packing, Mark said. Good, I replied, though my stomach was tight. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Mark sat on the couch, staring at nothing. This is going to change everything, he said quietly. It should, I told him. That's the point. And before we get into what happened the next morning, the confrontation that proved just how deep her bitterness ran, I want to hear from you. If you were in Mark's shoes, would you have given her a few days to pack or told her to leave immediately? Drop your thoughts below. Sometimes the hardest part isn't deciding what's right. It's acting on it when the person you're standing up to is family. Because what happened next, it showed me that even after you draw the line, some people will do everything they can to cross it one last time. Saturday morning, the air in the house was thick with unspoken hostility. Barbara's suitcase sat by the front door, half-zipped with clothes spilling out like she'd thrown them in without care. She moved through the kitchen as if she were a guest instead of someone about to leave, humming under her breath while making coffee. Mark had taken Ethan to his art class downtown to give them space and to shield him from whatever scene might erupt. I was grateful for that because I could feel the storm building. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there stood Linda, Mark's sister, with her 2 boys. They carried grocery bags and a bakery box. Thought we'd stop by, Linda said with forced cheer. I glanced over my shoulder at Barbara, who beamed as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Perfect timing, she said, bustling to the living room. I have something for the boys. From behind the couch, she pulled out 2 large gift bags, the kind with glittery designs and tissue paper puffing out the top. My stomach turned. This wasn't just generosity, it was theater. Linda's boys tore into the bags, pulling out brand new gaming consoles and stacks of games. Their whoops filled the room. Barbara clapped her hands. Only the best for my real grandkids, she declared. It was the exact same phrase she'd used at the barbecue. And she was saying it in my house on the very weekend we were asking her to leave. Linda laughed awkwardly, glancing at me. Oh, wow, that's generous. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Barbara, I said evenly, do you realize how inappropriate that is? She turned toward me, all faux innocence. What I can't give my grandsons a gift? You can give whoever you want a gift, I said. But making a point to exclude Ethan again is cruel. Especially when you know he'll hear about it. Her smile sharpened. Well, he's not here, is he? Besides, I'm leaving tomorrow. Might as well get this over with. Mark walked in at that exact moment, holding Ethan's hand. I'd never been more relieved to see them. Ethan's eyes darted to the consoles in the boy's hands. He didn't say a word, but the tight line of his mouth told me everything. Mark froze. What's going on? Just giving the boys a little something, Barbara said. You mean giving everyone except Ethan something, I said, my voice rising. Mark looked at his mother, and I saw something shift in his expression, a line hardening. You're unbelievable, he said. You couldn't even wait until you were gone to do this one more time. Barbara shrugged, unbothered. I'm just being honest. Blood matters. Ethan's grip on Mark's hand tightened. Mark knelt down so he was eye level with his son. Ethan, you know what she says isn't true, right? You're my son, my real son. Ethan nodded, but I could see the sheen in his eyes. Mark stood and faced Barbara. Get your things. You're leaving now. Barbara's eyes widened. What you said Sunday? That was before you decided to pull this stunt, he said. You've made your feelings about Ethan clear. Now let me make mine about you clear. You're not welcome here anymore. For a second I thought she'd argue, but something in Mark's tone must have told her he meant it. She huffed, grabbed her coffee, and stomped upstairs. I knelt beside Ethan. You okay? He gave a small shrug. Yeah, just glad she's going. And here's where I want to ask you, if someone showed you who they truly were, over and over, would you still give them another chance? Or would you close the door for good? Share your thoughts below, because for us, this moment sealed the decision. The next few hours would test that resolve and lead to one last confrontation we never saw coming. By the time Barbara came back downstairs, suitcase in hand, her expression was set like stone. She'd swapped her robe for a neatly pressed blouse and slacks, as if dressing up for her own exit. The faint clink of jewelry told me she'd put on her armor, the gold necklace she only wore when she wanted to project control. Mark was waiting in the living room, arms crossed. Ethan had retreated to his room upstairs, door closed. I sat on the edge of the couch, ready for whatever came next. Barbara set her suitcase by the door and straightened her shoulders. So that's it. You're throwing me out like trash after everything I've done for you. Mark didn't flinch. Everything you've done for me. Let's be clear, you've done a lot for my sister, for her kids. For Ethan, you've done nothing but make him feel like he doesn't belong. Barbara scoffed. Oh, please, he's too sensitive. The world isn't going to coddle him. That's not the world's job, Mark said, his voice firm. But it is the job of family to make sure he knows he's loved. You failed at that. Her eyes flashed. You're rewriting history. I took care of him when you two went on trips. I bought him Christmas presents. You bought him dollar store toys while you spent hundreds on the other kids, I said quietly. And you made sure he noticed the difference. Barbara turned on me, her voice rising. You've poisoned him against me. From the start, you've been trying to edge me out. Mark stepped in front of me. No one poisoned him. You did that yourself. For a moment, the room went still. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Barbara's face hardened into something cold. One day you'll regret this. Blood is blood. You'll see. Mark shook his head. Blood doesn't make you family. Love does. Respect does. And you've shown Ethan neither. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and yanked it toward the door. Fine. If that's how you feel, don't call me when you need help. Don't expect me at Christmas. You're on your own. Mark opened the door. We'll take our chances. She stopped in the doorway, glancing over her shoulder at me. You think you've won Claire, but you've just taken a mother away from her son. I met her gaze without blinking. No. You walked away the moment you decided he wasn't good enough for you. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she stepped outside the wheels of her suitcase, clattering down the walkway. When the door closed, Mark let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for years. It's over, he said, though his voice carried a note of something heavier finality mixed with grief. I put a hand on his arm. It's over for her in this house. But for Ethan, we've got some work to do. And before I tell you what happened when we explained it all to Ethan, how he reacted, what he said that broke my heart and mended it all at once, I want to know. Have you ever had to cut someone out of your life for the sake of your child? Did it bring relief? Or did it leave a hole you still feel? Your story might help someone else facing the same choice, because the conversation we had with Ethan later that evening would change how he saw himself and how we saw our role as his parents forever. That evening, after Barbara was gone, the house felt unnaturally quiet. No clink of her teacup in the kitchen, no heavy footsteps on the stairs. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't, not yet. The tension had broken, but the emotional dust was still hanging in the air. Ethan stayed upstairs the whole afternoon. Around dinner time, I went to his room, knocking gently. Hey, dinner's ready. Want to come down? There was a pause before his voice came low and uncertain. Is she gone? Yes, I said softly. She won't be living here anymore. When I stepped inside, I saw him sitting cross-legged on his bed, sketchbook in his lap. He looked at me like he was trying to read the truth in my face. Did you make her leave because of me? That question hit harder than I expected. I sat beside him. We made her leave because of how she treated you. That's not your fault. That's our job as your parents to protect you, even if it means making hard choices. His eyes dropped to his sketchbook. It's just... When she said I wasn't her real grandson, I started thinking maybe I'm not really part of this family. My throat tightened. Ethan looked at me. He did. You are as much a part of this family as anyone with our last name. Blood doesn't make you family, love does, and there's nothing you could ever do to make us love you less. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. That's the thing about words, they matter, but they don't erase scars overnight. Mark came in then carrying 3 mugs of hot chocolate. Mind if I join, he asked. Ethan shrugged, which for him was an invitation. Mark sat on the other side of the bed. Listen, buddy, he began. I know Grandma's words hurt, and I wish I'd stepped in sooner. That's on me. But I need you to know I'm proud to be your dad. Proud in a way I can't even put into words. Ethan's eyes glistened. He blinked hard and looked down at his mug. Thanks, Dad. We spent the rest of the evening in his room looking through his sketches. He showed us a new comic series he'd started, a hero who could create force fields to protect the people he loved. He can keep out anything bad, Ethan explained. even if it's family. Mark and I exchanged a glance. That comic wasn't just a story, it was his way of processing everything. Before bed, I tucked the blanket around him and kissed his forehead. You're safe here. Always. He gave a small smile, I know. Later that night, lying in bed beside Mark, I couldn't shake the thought Ethan was healing. But the wound Barbara left would take time to close. And in that moment, I made myself a promise I'd do everything in my power to make sure he never doubted where he belonged again. And here's where I'll leave you hanging, because what happened 2 weeks later when Barbara tried to reinsert herself into our lives tested that promise in ways I didn't expect. She didn't knock on our door. She didn't call. But she found a way to make herself heard, and it nearly undid everything we'd worked to repair. That moment was the final test, not just of our boundaries, but of whether Ethan truly believed what we'd told him, and it's a story you need to hear. 2 weeks later, life had started to feel almost normal again. Ethan was laughing more, spending time downstairs, even volunteering to help Mark with yard work. The shadows that had hung over him since the barbecue were beginning to lift. That's when the envelope showed up. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was sorting through the mail bills, junk flyers, a postcard from a friend when I saw it. A cream-colored envelope, our address written in neat, looping handwriting I recognized instantly. Barbara's. I stood there for a moment, thumb brushing over the flap. My first instinct was to drop it straight into the shredder, but something in me needed to know what she thought she could possibly say. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery. Mark, I've had time to think about our argument. I understand you were upset, but I'm still your mother, and I think you've made a rash decision. I would like to come back home. Things will be different. I can make an effort with him. She didn't even write Ethan's name, just him. I felt my jaw clench. Mark, I called, handing him the letter. He read it once, then again, slower, his expression hardening with each line. She doesn't get it, he said finally. She thinks this is about us being upset. She still doesn't see what she did to Ethan. Or she sees it and doesn't care, I said. Mark set the letter on the counter and looked at me. I'm not responding. If she wants to talk, she can do it somewhere other than our home. I agreed, but Barbara wasn't going to let it go that easily. 3 days later, we were at Ethan's school for the annual art fair. His latest comic series had been chosen for display, and he was buzzing with excitement. We were halfway through the exhibit when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there she was, Barbara. She looked exactly the same as when she'd left, but there was something different in her eyes, determination mixed with a smug kind of triumph. I heard Ethan had work on display, she said, as if she'd been invited. Mark stepped between us instantly. You shouldn't be here. I'm here to support my grandson, she said, loud enough for nearby parents to hear. Unless you're trying to keep me from being part of his life. I glanced at Ethan, who had frozen in place, his sketchbook clutched to his chest. His eyes flicked between us, uncertain and wary. This isn't the time or place, Mark said firmly. Barbara smiled sweetly. I think it's exactly the time. Everyone here can see how unreasonable you're being. That's when Ethan spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Grandma, I don't want you here. Barbara blinked as if she hadn't heard him right. What? I said I don't want you here. Ethan repeated, his grip tightening on his sketchbook. You made me feel like I wasn't part of the family. You don't get to show up now and pretend you care. The silence around us was deafening. A few parents shifted uncomfortably. Barbara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mark placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You heard him. Leave. For a moment I thought she might cause a scene, but then she spun on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the gym floor. Ethan let out a shaky breath. Can we go look at the rest of the art now? Of course, I said, my voice thick. And before I tell you what Ethan's comic, the one everyone was talking about, revealed about how he truly felt, I want you to think about this. If someone hurt your child deeply, and your child finally found the courage to speak up, would you step in, or let them hold their own ground? Because in that moment, Ethan didn't just hold his ground, he built it higher. We moved deeper into the art exhibit after Barbara left, and I could see the tension in Ethan's shoulders slowly ease. Rows of easels and display boards lined the gymnasium, each one showing off paintings, collages, and sculptures. But there was one section that seemed to draw a bigger crowd, Ethan's. His display featured a series of 6 large panels from his latest comic. The title, written in bold, stylized letters, read, The Fortress. The hero was a young boy with messy hair carrying a sketchbook like a shield. Around him stretched a shimmering force field, keeping out shadowy figures that pressed against the barrier with clawed hands. Mark and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't just a superhero story. In the first panel, the boy was alone in a crowded room. People inside the force field smiled at him, but the shadows outside sneered and pointed. One shadow drawn with sharper lines and a heavy frown was unmistakable if you knew the context. In the second panel, the shadow reached for the boy's sketchbook, but the force field pulsed brighter, pushing it back. By the fourth panel, the boy had built the barrier so high it touched the clouds. Inside, other kids played and laughed, safe under its protection. The shadows couldn't get in anymore, they were left to fade into the background. The last panel stopped me cold. The boy sat in the middle of his fortress, surrounded by the people who had stayed with him from the start. The text at the bottom read, "You don't need everyone to love you. You just need the right ones to stay." Ethan stood beside me, watching my reaction. "Do you get it?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, buddy, I get it." Mark put a hand on his shoulder. "It's incredible. You turned something awful into something powerful." Ethan shrugged, but a small smile tugged at his lips. "I guess. I just wanted to make sure, that I could remember the good people and keep out the bad ones." "That's exactly what you did," I said. As the evening went on, people stopped to compliment him. Parents he didn't even know told him they loved the message. One teacher leaned down and whispered, "That's wisdom most adults don't figure out for years." By the time we got home, Ethan was lighter, like he'd finally put down something heavy he'd been carrying since the barbecue. Later, when Mark and I were alone, I told him that comic wasn't just for the art fair. It was for him. A way to close the chapter. Mark nodded. And maybe a way to show her, without saying her name, that she doesn't get to define him. Still, a part of me wondered if Barbara would see it. Maybe she'd hear about it from Linda, or someone else. And if she did, would she understand the message? Or would she twist it into something that let her sleep at night? That question stayed with me. And it wasn't long before I got my answer, because 1 week later, Barbara sent something to Ethan in the mail that proved she hadn't learned a single thing. And what she sent, it wasn't just tone deaf, it was a final insult that made Ethan's force field feel more necessary than ever. A week after the art fair, a small padded envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Ethan. The handwriting was instantly familiar Barbara's. I found it sitting on top of the pile when I came in from the mailbox. My first thought was to toss it straight into the trash, but then I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shield Ethan from whatever was inside. Another part knew that avoiding it wouldn't erase the reality that Barbara still existed and still had the potential to hurt him. When Ethan came home from school, I handed him the envelope. "It's from your grandmother," I said gently. He turned it over in his hands, frowning. "Should I open it?" "That's up to you," I replied. "We can do it together if you want." He nodded, so we sat at the kitchen table. Mark came in halfway through, sensing something was up. Ethan tore the top carefully and pulled out a folded note and a small object wrapped in tissue paper. The note was short. "Ethan, I saw your comic at the art fair. Very creative. You should draw more happy things instead of building walls. Here's something to remind you of your real family." The tissue paper unwrapped to reveal a cheap keychain, a miniature family crest that Barbara's side of the family used on stationery and Christmas ornaments. On the back, she'd scratched "Blood First" in tiny letters. Ethan stared at it for a moment, then set it down like it was something rotten. "She still doesn't get it," he said flatly. Mark's jaw tightened. "No, she doesn't. And that's on her, not you." I reached over and covered Ethan's hand. "You know this doesn't mean anything, right? This isn't your real family. Your real family is the people who show up for you, who make you feel safe." Ethan nodded, but his voice was quiet when he said, "I guess she's one of the shadows now." "That's exactly right," I said. "And you've already built the wall to keep her out." Mark picked up the keychain, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. "We don't keep things that try to hurt us." Ethan's lips curled into a small smile. "Good." For the rest of the evening, he was quieter than usual, but there was a steadiness in him that hadn't been there before. It was as if receiving that keychain, the final proof that Barbara would never change, had helped him close a door in his mind. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, I turned to Mark. "She's never going to stop trying, is she?" "Probably not," he said. "But as long as we stay solid, she won't get through." And here's where I want to pause before the final twist, because what happened next wasn't just about Barbara trying again. It was about Ethan taking control in a way neither of us saw coming. What he did in response to her final attempt to push her way back in. It was the moment I realized he had truly built his own fortress. And the way he did it Honestly, it left me in awe. 2 days after the keychain incident, Ethan came home from school with a determined look in his eyes, the kind of expression you see when a kid has made up their mind about something important. He didn't drop his backpack in its usual spot or wander into the kitchen for a snack. Instead, he went straight to his room. Mark and I exchanged a glance. "Think we should check on him?" I asked. "Let's give him a minute," Mark said, though I could tell he was just as curious as I was. About half an hour later, Ethan emerged holding his sketchbook tight against his chest. "I have something I want to send to Grandma," he said. I felt my stomach tighten. "Ethan, you don't have to respond to her." "I know," he interrupted, "but I want to, not to fight, just to make it clear." He laid the sketchbook on the table and flipped to a fresh page. There, in bold, deliberate strokes, was a new drawing, the fortress from his comic taller and stronger than ever. The boy inside was smiling, surrounded by a crowd of people, Mark, me, a few friends, and even his art teacher. The shadows outside were faint, almost transparent, like they were fading away. At the bottom, in careful lettering, he'd written, "Family is who stays." Mark leaned over to get a better look. "That's perfect." Ethan nodded. "I'm going to make a copy and mail it to her. No note, no explanation, just this." Part of me wanted to stop him to protect him from whatever reaction Barbara might have. But I also saw the resolve in his eyes. This wasn't about her approval. It was about his closure. The next day, we helped him scan the drawing and print it on heavy paper. He slid it into an envelope, addressed it in neat block letters, and sealed it without ceremony. Mark took him to the post office so he could drop it in the mailbox himself. When they came back, Ethan seemed lighter, like mailing that envelope had taken a weight off his shoulders. "She might not even understand it," I said later that night as Mark and I got ready for bed. "She doesn't have to," Mark replied. "It wasn't for her. It was for him." 3 days later, an envelope arrived in our mailbox. My heart skipped when I saw the handwriting. I handed it to Ethan, bracing myself for whatever Barbara had written. He opened it, slowly scanning the single sheet inside. Then he laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh I hadn't heard in weeks. "It's blank," he said, holding it up. "She didn't write anything, just sent the drawing back." Mark frowned. "Guess that's her way of saying she's not interested in the message." Ethan shrugged. "That's fine. I wasn't talking to her anyway." It was in that moment I realized Barbara's opinion no longer had the power to define him. He had drawn his line, built his wall, and planted himself firmly on the side of the people who loved him. And before I tell you how that newfound strength played out in the final chapter of this story, the moment when Ethan stood in front of an entire room and claimed his place in our family for good, I want to ask you, have you ever sent a message to someone not for them to read, but for you to release? Because sometimes the act of sending is the closure. It happened a month later at Linda's house. She'd invited us for a Sunday afternoon get-together. Nothing fancy, just barbecue in the backyard, cousins running around, and music playing low from a speaker on the deck. Mark and I debated going, but Ethan surprised us. "I want to," he said. "I'm ready." Linda had always been kinder to Ethan than Barbara, though she'd never openly challenged her mother's behavior. Still, this was extended family territory. There was always the chance Barbara would be there. When we arrived, it felt like any other family cookout, kids tossing a football burger sizzling on the grill. I relaxed a little when I saw no sign of Barbara. But about 30 minutes in, as Mark and I were talking with Linda near the patio, the air shifted. A few heads turned toward the driveway. Barbara. She walked in like she owned the place, holding a covered dish and wearing that same confident smile she always used when she wanted to control a room. Linda looked flustered, muttering something about not knowing she'd come. I glanced at Ethan, ready to whisk him away if needed, but he stood his ground, watching Barbara set her dish on the table. When she finally spotted him, her smile flickered just for a second before she plastered it back on. "Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "I'm glad you're here." The chatter around us softened. People were listening. Ethan took a slow step forward. "I'm here because I belong here," he said clearly, his voice carrying over the quiet. Barbara tilted her head. "Of course you do, dear." He shook his head. "No, not of course. Not from you. You made it clear you didn't think I was part of the family, but I am. I'm my dad's son. I'm Claire's son. That's my family." It was the kind of statement that could have hung awkwardly in the air. But instead, a ripple went through the crowd, small nods, murmurs of agreement. Mark moved to stand behind him, resting a hand on his shoulder. Barbara's mouth tightened. "You're young. You don't understand." "I understand enough," Ethan said, cutting her off. Family is the people who show up, who make you feel safe. That's not you. And I don't need you to be part of my life to know I'm loved. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Linda, of all people, said, "He's right." Her voice was steady and her gaze was fixed on her mother. "You've been unfair to him for years, Mom. We've all seen it." Barbara's eyes darted around, searching for someone to back her up. No one did. The silence was an answer in itself. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped back toward us. "I'm going to get a burger," he said casually, as if he hadn't just dropped the heaviest truth bomb this family had ever heard. As the evening went on, Barbara kept to herself at the far end of the table. She didn't approach Ethan again. And for the first time in years, he played with his cousins without glancing over his shoulder, without that constant low-grade anxiety of wondering if he belonged. Driving home that night, Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. "He didn't just stand up to her," he said. "He claimed his place. For good." I nodded, watching Ethan in the rearview mirror as he stared out the window, a small, satisfied smile on his face. And before I take you into the final part of this story, the moment when we closed the door on Barbara for good and gave Ethan the kind of home he deserved, I want you to imagine this. What would your life look like if you never again questioned whether you belonged? Because for Ethan, that question had finally been answered. 2 weeks after the barbecue at Linda's, the final chapter with Barbara wrote itself, though not in the way I had expected. It started with a letter from our lawyer. Barbara had attempted to file for grandparent visitation rights in the county court. In her statement, she claimed Mark and I were alienating Ethan from his biological family and that her exclusion was causing him emotional harm. I read the pages twice, my hands trembling not with fear, but with disbelief. After everything, she was still trying to force her way in. Mark came home from work, and I slid the envelope across the table. He skimmed it, let out a humorless laugh, and said, "She just doesn't get it." But you know what? This is the last straw. No more responding, no more warnings. We do this the legal way. We contacted our lawyer, gathered statements from Ethan's teachers' neighbors, and even Linda, each one confirming that Barbara's presence had been a source of stress, not comfort, for Ethan. The case never made it past the initial hearing. The judge, after reviewing our documentation and Ethan's own written statement, dismissed it outright. In his statement, Ethan had written something that stopped me cold. "My parents make me feel safe. My grandmother makes me feel small. I don't want to feel small anymore." When we told Ethan the case was closed, he didn't celebrate. He just nodded and said, "Good. Now she can't knock on the door anymore." And that's exactly what we promised him that she never would. We had a security system installed, changed our phone numbers, and made it clear to extended family that contact information was not to be shared. For the first time in years, I felt the air in our home shift not from tension, but from relief. It was as if the walls themselves could finally exhale. One Saturday morning, Ethan was at the kitchen table sketching while sunlight streamed through the windows. He looked up and said, "I think I'm going to draw something new. No walls this time." "What will it be?" I asked. "A garden," he said with a smile. "A place where only the people I invite can come in." That's when I realized he wasn't just protected anymore. He was free. Mark and I joined him at the table, sipping coffee while he sketched. The smell of bacon on the stove, the sound of pencils on paper, the peace in our home, it felt like the life we'd been working toward had finally arrived. Barbara was gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. She no longer had the power to hurt him. And as much as this was the end of her chapter in our lives, it was also the beginning of Ethan's next one, a chapter he was going to write entirely on his own terms. If you've been through something like this, cutting ties to protect your family, you know it's not about winning. It's about making space for peace, love, and growth. It's about making sure the people inside your walls are there because they want to be, not because they're related by blood. And if you want to hear another story about breaking free from toxic family ties, one that takes a very different turn, make sure you stay tuned for my next video. Trust me, it's a twist you won't see coming. Because sometimes closing a door isn't the end of the story. It's just the moment you finally get to choose what and who comes through it. The seasons shifted quietly after that. Winter melted into spring, and with it the sharp edges of the past began to soften. Our home no longer carried that undercurrent of watchfulness, the constant readiness for the next knock, the next unwanted intrusion. Instead, it was filled with small, ordinary moments: Saturday pancakes, evening walks, and lazy afternoons spent reading in the living room. Ethan's garden sketches became a real plan. One weekend, we went to the nursery and picked out flowers, herbs, and a small cherry tree. We planted them together in the backyard, our hands in the soil, our laughter carried on the breeze. The cherry tree stood in the center, Ethan's idea. "It'll be the first thing people see when they come in," he explained, "so they know this is a place for growing things, not tearing them down." As weeks passed, the garden began to bloom, and so did Ethan. The heaviness that had once shadowed his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He spoke up more in class, invited friends over, and even entered another art competition, this time with a series of bright, open landscapes. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, Ethan and I stood by the cherry tree. "It feels different now," he said. "How so?" I asked. "Like the walls are still there," he said with a small smile, "but now they're covered in flowers." I pulled him into a hug, holding on a little longer than usual. "That's the best kind of fortress," I whispered. And in that moment, I knew we hadn't just built safety. We'd built a life worth protecting.